So welcome everybody. I'm Nancy Knowles. I'm president of the board of directors for Art Center East. And I'm happy to welcome folks to the ACE Writing Project tonight. We'll be featuring Nancy Christopherson, and Amelia Ettinger will introduce her momentarily. I just want to start off with our land acknowledgement and talk briefly about Art Center East. So we recognize that we all live and work on Indigenous homelands. Specifically, Art Center East and its programs reside on the ancestral homelands of the Cayuse, Umatilla, Walla Walla, and Nez Perce peoples. A land acknowledgement is one way of many toward showing respect and understanding that these lands carry the stories of Indigenous peoples' struggle for survival and identity through the effects of colonization. This acknowledgement challenges us to consider Indigenous perspectives, learn Indigenous histories, seek input from and partnership with Indigenous groups, and take time to participate in present-day Indigenous events and learning opportunities. And we look forward to many of those in the future. So Art Center East is celebrating its 45th anniversary this year. It was founded in 1977. And the quilt behind me was by Joy Cleaver. It is hanging in our current show, which is a fiber arts and jewelry show. We also have artwork by Sarah Bird hanging in our main gallery, and that show is up through the end of March. I invite you to stop by or online purchase a raffle ticket for the quilt. It's truly lovely. And so Art Center East has been offering classes and residencies for kids in the schools and events, public events, and private music lessons and art ensemble, music ensembles and art programming for quite a long time. We're glad we made it through the pandemic. Hopefully that's behind us and we're headed into really robust in-person and online offerings. So if you're interested in more information about Art Center East, we are online and happy to have folks stop by or give us a call. So with that, I'll turn it over to Amelia.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here. I would like to present you Nancy Christopherson. Her poems have appeared in many journals, magazines, and reviews, and she's the author of a collection of poetry entitled The Leaf that was published in 2015. She is a local resident and writes from our beautiful Baker City. And without further ado, here is Nancy.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Amelia. And thanks to Art Center East for making this reading possible. And thanks to all of you who have come to listen. I really appreciate your time and attention. I'm going to read a couple of poems from my book, The Leaf. And then I'm going to move on and read some poems from a manuscript in progress called tentatively Canyon Poems. I may make that a little longer. And then after I read some poems from that manuscript, I'm going to read some new poems. And then we'll be finished and you can all read your poems. My collection, The Leaf, contains a lot of poems about the natural world, but it also contains poems about my mother who passed away some years ago. She had several rather serious health problems, not the least of which was dementia. And as we are all learning, dementia is a very challenging illness and is distressing for the patient as well as extremely challenging and distressing for the caretakers. So I'm going to read just a few of the poems about my mom, and then I'm going to move on to Canyon poems. One of the many decisions. Teeth, she would say, repeating after me, and would open her mouth. They were crumbling. She would spit them. She would plunge in a finger and bring one out on her fingertip. and hold it there between thumb and forefinger, rolling it, chunky, ringed like a damaged pearl. I would sometimes go out after caretaking duties and after my work, after my job, I would go and take some time for myself out in nature. And one of the places that I enjoyed going was Georgetown Lake, which is in Montana. And I was standing on the edge of Georgetown Lake, and some of these images came from that experience. Evening. At Georgetown Lake, dragonflies dart near water's edge. From there, one can hear water lapping at sides of boats heading in, or make out a few snatches of conversation yelled and caught by the wind, choked by the throttle, late men with their catches sloshing around between leftover beers and soggy sandwiches. A ringed neck grebe drifts further out, pulling the low clouds down around her ears. Water swells toward her in wave after wave. Red feet working, she reaches out with her neck and brays, her water solitude bray. A slight pausing as she rises up and over each swell, then sinks, riding it out. Under the deepening drizzle, a pale green caterpillar labors, waterlogged, through a widening puddle, lifting its thick body forward, segment by segment, grasping for footholds, floating mostly, its yellow head probing the surface for air, a twig, anything. My mother moves through forest green and mauve corridors, stops now and then, looks around. Her hair is thick and white, soft if it's clean, if she lets them, and it's short. She wears warm pink sweatpants and white sweatshirt, pink and lavender flowers up front, bumblebees gathering pollen, buzzing off down her left sleeve. My breast is feathered, and my feet are unwebbed. They are red. It is evening. I am dying. I am paddling, yet I am dying. You see, my wings have folded for the last time, and they will not open. I am grebe. I am calling. Can you hear me? It is evening. I am grebe. I am calling. Caretakers usually have the responsibility of tending to their loved ones' affairs and personal items, etc. I would frequently bring my mother's clothing home from the nursing home and make repairs because those industrial washing machines are pretty wicked on clothes. Mending my mother's clothes. I bring them home with me from the nursing home periodically. Sometimes a button broken or missing, or a seam needs restitching. Today, it's a single white button from a blouse needs replacement. A 6-inch gap in her royal blue bathrobe, torn below the long zipper, needs to be sewn. I'm sitting at my desk in the spare room, digging through an old tin sewing box for just the right button, small, with 4 holes in it, not 2. And my oversized blue coffee mug steams, soothing with the milk and sugar she loved. It's cold and clear outside. Lolo Peak gleams white in the sun, white against blue. I remember sitting at the edge of the big mahogany bed next to her, closet door wide open before us, her teaching me how to sew buttons on and how to stitch hems, her closets full of beautiful clothes, gowns and furs and hats and fragrant, delicate things wrapped all around with tissue. I wasn't allowed to touch, but I did. She would guide the tiny needle in through one hole and out through another, crisscross, time after time, until finally she would say, "There, see, all done." And then I would do it. And then she would take out one of her dresses that I loved, the green silk one, perhaps, or the white marquisette, and would turn up the hem, exposing the nearly invisible threads. And she would cut through them with her fine little blade, releasing the soft fabric. And then we would sew it all back together again. Wouldn't it be the greatest joy in all the world if there were a cure for dementia and we could save our loved ones from this dreadful disease? And so caretaking involves so many things: personal physical care of our loved ones' bodies. This poem is called Redemption, and it's got an epigraph from Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov. Then he remembered and said to God, "She once pulled an onion in her kitchen garden." It is late afternoon and winter begins to soften. A young woman, bending down, uses lights from the window for her work. An old woman rests, facing twilight, dreaming the smooth grayness of pearl. Someone she trusts is bathing her feet. One of them mentions a fine sandy beach, a gentle rolling of waves. The other one closes her eyes. A pearl has washed up on shore. Remembering a garden once tended, the young woman snips carefully at the nails grown thick with neglect. She coos while she works and lovingly cradles the toes in her hands. She has found a small pearl in her garden and lifts it to show to the other, but the other has fallen asleep, so she chooses to leave it and slips quietly out of the room. When my mother died, her right eyelid didn't close all the way, leaving a shallow band of opaque at the bottom. And I tried to close it using my right fingertips, the way they used to do in the movies, close the eyes of the deceased with one pass of the hand over the face, then cover over the body with a blanket. Well, it didn't work. It wouldn't stay closed. So I drew back for a moment. Then I leaned down and pressed it back open, the globe still warm and firm underneath, just to see, and the light blue iris poking out just a little in the center. But it wouldn't stay open. It would only slide slowly back down, leaving that same shallow band of opaque at the bottom. Not her choice, not mine, but some other. And the final poem I'm going to read from this collection is for my brother, Putting Things Right. After the funeral, the girls moving off. The girls coming back with fresh baby Harry, setting him down in the grass. Harry happily crawling around in the grass in his soft chambray breeches sewn for him by his grandmother on his daddy's side, and rolled up about 3 times and cinched with a belt, drooling some, grasping at grass blades, putting them quickly into his mouth. Julie just as quickly retrieving them. White cumulus clouds overhead building into the afternoon. Alan with his beautiful haircut and his sunglasses, he and I together again after years, like children again in the grass. Our grandnephew climbing all over us, crawling up into our laps, drooling on Alan's hands, on Alan, who is childless, grabbing at his watch, his shoelaces, my pant legs. Alan plucking handfuls of grass, telling Julie how refreshing to have little Harry here. Julie smiling. My little brother and I on the small slope of our front lawn, running down into the neighbor's drive, tumbling heads over heels, red kids, white, half moon rubber toes, rubber blue tabs on the heels, rolling red kids, bare legs down, arms at our sides. Fallen little toy soldiers onto the warm concrete. Grass in our hair, bits of thatch, laughter, small twigs in the early evening air. Our mother standing nearby. Alan, in the end, our mother would go anywhere with me, as long as I took her by the hand, so I brought her back here. This is for you. You who were abandoned too soon by your mother, who got down anyway onto your hands and your knees to lower mom's urn into dirt, and who so patiently now holds urn above dirt while I snap open briefly the necessary shutter. But for a handful of grass, we are middle-aged children, you and I, your beautiful, earnest face turning toward mine. Our mother can wait for her roses. You are my brother. I love you. Just give me a moment. Now I'm going to change the tone and the pace. And I wish to read for you some of my Canyon poems from my manuscript in progress. I'm working hard to keep track of the time here for you. For about a dozen years, I lived and worked on the south rim of Grand Canyon National Park, and it was an extraordinary 12 years. One of the joys of my life was working down in the canyon as a volunteer ranger. I actually had an assigned ranger station, and I spent pretty much every waking moment of my free time down in the canyon, either working and helping the park with my services or just hiking for my own personal joy, because it was an exquisite experience. Anyway, so I'm going to start off this group with a poem called Ranger Station. Because so many people have no clue what goes on inside a ranger station, I decided to write a poem about it. Ranger Station. An autumn sun slants in through the small window of the living area, lighting up the dust across the top of the gun safe. I want to clean that off before I leave late this afternoon for the long, deep winter ahead. So far this morning, 3 cases of subungual hematoma, that's canyon toe, 2 knees, a permit extension, 1 rattlesnake sighting, and an 8-year-old Boy Scout who spent the night puking his guts out along the trail to the head. The leader's loud, panicked banging, oops, sorry, I just lost my poem. Hold on. So sorry. Puking his guts out along the trail to the head. The leader's loud, panicked banging at my door woke me in the night just to let me know. Vomit always frightens people. The brain typically jettisons what it can when things aren't perceived as going well. Not easy to clean up. I scooped what I could with my gloves and scraped dirt and sand across the rest with my boots. The kid is resting comfortably in his tent at their shady site. I've arranged for them to stay another night while they recovers. Daily events. The fluid and lumps scatter easily in the breeze over clods and stone and scrub. Desiccation is quick at this elevation. Ants will take care of anything else they find worth eating. Just now I rescued a baby bird from the clutches of a tree lizard out front at the picnic table beneath big cottonwoods. Most hikers stop here for rest and snacks before moving on. One, apparently a young girl, began shrieking at the top of her lungs. I ran out to what I imagined would be extreme injury, then found the baby bird with its broken wing bones extruded, naked among the layers of downed leaves, dry twigs, detritus of years. The lizard wanted that meal badly. I hated to interrupt, but knew what would happen later. So I scooped up the bird and set it peeping desperately for its parents on the limb of a nearby willow. This is wilderness. The wild animals must eat, I explained softly. I promised to check the bird later. There are many tree lizards. 6 kinds of lizards plus 3 types of rattlesnakes, not to mention the scorpions and other large arachnids whose webs could capture bats. Perilous landscape for small creatures. I have managed to finish my log entry and must finish mopping, then turn off the propane and shutter the place before checking permits and giving a night safety check to all 12 campsites. Sometimes I point out stars or a comet or an iridium flare, the latter of which always elicits loud cheers and wows. After, I will hoist my pack and start the luxurious trek out to the rim. I breathe deeply. Big pug marks today in sand along Wall Creek, I write. And occasionally I would be able to escape the ranger station and my duties and go on my own personal hikes. And so that particular day, I went up Wall Creek and found some big pug marks. A big cat was up there, and that was fabulous. So of course I entered that in my log. That was a long poem. Thank you for your patience for listening to that. And I read it probably too quickly, but I don't want to run out of time. So a little more personal note, rangers are human too. A few lines on a Saturday night. There's a piece of white sandstone on my dresser with your name on it, which reminds me, I touch it sometimes. A few white hairs scattered among the plush black ones. You said it felt like exploring with Sakakawea. Sometimes we rested but had to be there. Last year I spotted large cat tracks along the same route. The size of that bounding leap and the rear paw slide. It had to be a big male out along the ledge in the snow. The landing dicey, the deer spoor ending right there in a faint smudge of blood. That bitter sub-zero weather, each of us trying to survive. And I was out with a ranger doing a patrol one week, and it was just before a full moon, and full moon happened to come up during this particular occasion, and this poem came. Bowing to the moon and it nodding back. Eric with me at cremation. We're upstream, unobtrusive. 2.5 days with our light packs. He's in his bag. I'm in my bivvy. This is where it all ended for one curled up in that pour-off alcove, where many have dropped others' ashes. A bleak place, but the wash is wide, and farther down, slick rock. The filter has plugged again, so pumping is difficult. There is water enough. One more day or half day, in and out of Boulder Creek 3 times, then go our separate ways. A full moon begins rising over the red wall, apricot and glorious. Wide as the desert with the sun going down, limestone lit up and glowing. All that mica and agate, how it shimmers. There the quartz is embedded, shells of past animals or their castings. This night, I get cold as a corpse and shiver. I will not see you ever again, but do not know that yet. There is still some glimmer of hope, clear as that big round moon rising. Most of my time I spent solo in the canyon. I rarely had the opportunity to hike with other people. My schedules just didn't work out. And I would sometimes go out and just sit on a ledge at some point, mid-level down, halfway down the canyon or something, and just gaze around and just soak it in complete and utter silence, except for whatever animals showed up. And sometimes they did. And of course, we all know about the ubiquitous raven. They love humans. Raven. Occasional Occasionally, nothing at all will come, and I write, I'm sorry, I'm going to start over. Occasionally, nothing at all will come, and I rely on an old bird to fly out to the ledge where I'm perched and drop it. He sidles up with that oily black head, that intelligent eye blink, not mine, lays it down at my feet. Oh, Raven, you are great. Oh, Raven, you are great, I chant, this done in silence, for I don't want to break up the rhythm he has brought. I pour water, a small depression in slick rock, to make a puddle. Water for a charm, we are square. All along he watches, he cocks his legs, ready for liftoff. Oh, great sly bird, I sing. Sometimes I would really love to escape the crowds on the South Rim, and I would slip around to the North Rim. And out on the west edge of the park boundary, there were wonderful Forest Service places that a person could go and just camp all by themselves. And it was so wonderful. And one of the places that I went is called Wampits. And I love the name of this place, Wampits. I mean, how fabulous is that? I love these names, Wampits. Out here on the west end of the north end, watching the sun go down. What was it? The layers or non-repeating ridge lines disappearing in the distance, obscured by that blue sundown haze, the orange flame in the center, which drew me. I, with my little hissing backpack stove, its one burner igniting the black night, which is rapidly approaching. Soon, the stars and the planets, Venus first, then Jupiter, the smudge of the Pleiades. I with my hot cocoa, which will keep me awake long after midnight. How the spruce and the fir and the pines mix in with aspen. How they all shimmer silver from the glow of the headlamp. My lovely ghosts. In the morning, it is back out to the developed area of the park's north rim, past the meadows, the wild turkey, the bison, always deer. But for now, this compact flame hissing and the water boils. It is long since I saw you, my friend. It seems accurate that nothing turns out the way we expect it. There will always be loss. Look, the last gold fleck has expired, been snuffed out by horizon. Las Vegas is way, way, way over there. Even then, it is too close by my estimation. Here the night is silent. Let it remain so. We can hear the call of the nighthawks. I with my tan skin and my boots. You with your grave face. And I see that we are at about 7:34, so I'm going to move forward into a poem about the Colorado River, which is sadly diminishing, but it was still mighty when I was there. The name of this poem is called Finding Center. Finding center, that boulder in the center of the gut. Fish swim around it or idle quietly, fanning their tails in the pool on the slow side of the river. River right over there. River left cuts in under that solid wall, which will drown you, keep you under forever. The shoreline holds multiple breakfasts and bits of flotsam washed up. So many have passed. Open out that bony jaw, look inside. The strictured corset, Jonas whale. You may never escape, but at least there is drizzle and muddy water to swallow. The slow current meanders through reeds in some places, quicksand in others. Step here, it says, sink down or swim. Die what your father used to say as he tossed you overboard, then laughed. Don't worry, those toothy boulders will capture your spirit once they have crushed the sweet chambered heart. One last canyon poem. I used to love to spend time in the winter up on the North Rim because it would be completely vacant and just snow and trees and animals. So it was exquisite. Sculptor. The wind brought the Arctic air, the clear sky, blue today, and stars brilliant at night, and blew the snow into drifts across roads, blew the deep snow. Once on the North Rim, I skied in, then lay down on the snow and made angels. I wrote peace. I wrote love inside their bodies. I wrote love beside them, drew arrows through the centers of their hearts. Do you know what I mean? On the way back out, a coyote I could see followed me, paralleled my tracks about 100 yards off. I suspect the rest of the pack trotted along hidden, undetected behind big pines and barren brush. Mostly the snowfield was open. Light snowflakes in number and beauty flashed. I looked into the Creator's face for the second time. Overwhelming simplicity. There was no plan. I took my skis off. The animal removed its fur coat. Each of us exposed to the elements, cold beings hungry for anything that sparkled or moved. We just stood there. And because the time is getting late, I am going to just read a couple of quick new poems. And knowing me, I love to be outdoors. And in the middle of a very rainy, wet March some years back, I went out and sat on my front porch, and I live in this gorgeous place, and there's like a field across the street that's just vacant except for trees and weeds and stuff. And the trees happen to be willow trees. They're just beautiful. In those trees, there are lots of little frogs. Tree frogs at 8:30 p.m. on a Wednesday night in rain, fulfilling a promise made long ago. Grant that the stars shine above these thick layers. Still, I sit on the concrete step of the front porch and listen as the mystery unravels. None of it's secret. Knit, pearl, and I am going to read 3 more poems if you can tolerate that. You guys can stay with me for a few more minutes. The Pacific Northwest fascinates me after living in the desert Southwest. It's so wet. And there's the ocean, which is just indescribable. It's so powerfully beautiful. And so I was thinking about some of the people who perhaps work maybe on the coast, maybe fishermen. And this poem came. It's called Effigy of a Man. What if, for instance, thoughts flew from your mind like seagulls crying for fish entrails near a fisherman's vessel at noon, fog rolling in? Wouldn't that be open? Watch their wings, the boat rocking gently on swells. Your name could be Ahab or Yvonne or Giovanni. You might live in Havana or Vancouver or Odessa. You could be 17 or 75. Your sweater could be dry or smeared with offal. What can the nets bring toward you? What might they reveal you don't already know intimately? Your friend at home in his clean apron setting the small table, maybe your mother. The gulls swing and curl in the mist while the waves slap at the planks, splash upward in spray. You toss the bucket skyward. The gulls swoop in, cry with greedy delight. This is your one life, and you know it. This evening, when you get in, you will scrape out under your fingernails with your pocket knife, light the bonfire, watch it burn. 2 more poems. These are personal. which is always fun. I was very young. My father was a geologist, and he would take the family out into the fields on occasion. And I just vaguely remember some details from this one trip that we took into Wyoming. And it was just the most extraordinary experience. And somehow I had my father to myself. How that happened, I have no idea. The rest of the family was there, but I happened to be with my daddy right then. And this extraordinary rainstorm came. And sometimes here in Baker City, we actually get rain. It happens rarely, but we do occasionally get some. And every once in a while, I'll get some bulbs popping up out of the ground. This poem is called It Rains Sometimes. It rains sometimes here. It smells like jonquils, small yellow-orange cupped bulb flowers like daffodils. You've seen them early in parks and botanical gardens outside. I have enjoyed having that odor, unique, like jonquils. Just myself and themselves married in early spring like this, with the rain, sometimes in light or strong showers, and the sun peeking through a vault of clouds. It was Wyoming when it happened. We were in Wyoming, a glorious rainbow afterward over town where everyone looked up, breathed in the sweet, clear air. Jonquils. No metaphor, just sunlight striking the curtain of droplets as it moved past where I was holding my father's hand. I could step into rain, into light as I chose. My father viewed all phenomena objectively. What stood in wonder as the keen visual display captured his daughter's attention, say his heart. The two of us among the townsfolk as we gazed up in silence and took in that spectacle of elements wafting like scent. That's from my daddy. He passed away in 2004. I miss him. This final poem I'm going to read for you tonight, and thank you so kindly for your attention. This poem is dedicated to my son, who is here tonight. Love you, Josh. Lake McDonald. This is in Glacier National Park. I love the outdoors. Lake McDonald. Since you stood looking into that late sun with your smile mild and your hands on your hips, turning slightly toward me for the photo, I have missed you enormously. Whole mountains have fallen. Pebbles have rolled smooth as breath on these shores. Logs gone piled by wind. I'm trying to reach higher these days. Birdwoman falls. Time having passed much more quickly. Spruce and snow melt, white pine at tree line, full gorges of granite. The glaciers now severely receded. There you were on your bed with a book and your snorkel surrounded by ski gear. I tried so hard to follow, but clearly was lost. During one sudden downpour, we dashed to the Jeep and headed for shelter, picked up some drenched boaters roadside, drove them to safety. So grateful. Defroster on high to see out the windows. How many times did I return searching for answers? Any sign among the deep petals along that shore? I've been hauling a bag of them through the years, holding on to that memory. Your beauty, my son. I still hear earth turning as you stood there. A small, faint instant of synchronized action in the wilderness of our lives. Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy. That was a delight.
Thank you.
I would like to invite folks to ask questions. Do you have questions for Nancy about her poems or her craft?
I know that you're all experienced poems yourself, so it's really quite all right if you don't have any questions. My poems were fairly easy to understand.
And I can ask questions or comments. I wanted to say thank you so much for sharing that those poems, especially the ones from Leaf about your mom. They were intense and sorrowful and like personal, but not private, I guess is how it, and the one. I was having a whole bunch of thoughts as you were reading it, so I may have, and only hearing you read it. But the one with the toenails and the pearl, with that was an episode of the dementia, and I'm curious, was did your mother report that to you and then you turned it into the poem, or is that you imagining a situation to go along with it? It was intense, and it had like this great surreal quality to it, and so I was interested in that. Like I said, I may have misheard it because I was having all sorts of thoughts while you were reading it.
Oh, that's such an awesome question and such a complimentary comment to make. Actually, the young woman in the poem was me. I was in caretaking my mother. And but yes, it was a very surreal moment. So many things were coming to my mind as I was kneeled there at her feet and caring for her. That's a really sacred experience to do something like that for another human being. It's very private and very sweet. And if you have ever had your toes fondled by anyone, it is a delicious experience. So she was really, really feeling comfortable and relaxed. And it was a gift for me to be able to do that for her. And during those years, I was also studying foreign language at the University of Montana. I was studying the language of Russian, actually. And I was reading Dostoevsky in Russian, and which was amazing. Oh my God, what an awesome. Speaking of a writer, wow. Anyway, so Brothers Karamazov was probably my favorite work of his. It was his masterpiece. And so I, of course, there's a moment of redemption that takes place in the Brothers Karamazov. And so I made that quote from Dostoevsky. And that just kind of collided with what I was experiencing while I was caretaking my mother. And so those things came together, but it was very surreal. It was indeed a surreal experience. I'm so glad that came through. Thank you. I was attempting to make that a very relaxing and gentle experience for the listener, as well as for my mom.
I appreciated the way getting into the nature poems and your experiences in the Grand Canyon and elsewhere. I'm a bird watcher, and I've been doing it for, gosh, I don't know, 30 years or something like that. I mean, it had been not lifelong. It's been since the 80s. I won't tell the whole story about how it came about, but in any case, one of the things that I've found in that is that besides the birds themselves, that's so rewarding is you have to, well, a lot of them will come to me. I mean, mid-Atlantic of the US is like rich with bird life all year round, but a lot of times you have to go out and find them, and you go into these natural areas and you kind of have to learn a little bit about the trees and maybe a little bit about the flowers and maybe some of the other animals that are around. And I realized I'd never consciously, like I've studied birds a lot, not scientifically, but I'm in the field and in books and things like that. And I never really said out, oh, well, I also need to know these other things, but how much you absorb from, just like you said, you like to be outdoors. It's how much you absorb, even if you're focused on, your main interest. And I like the way that showed up in those poems. It's like the one sitting on the Grand Canyon and the raven comes up. That's like, I mean, it seems magical. It seems, oh, you made that up. But I mean, I've never had that specific experience, but I know that's actually real. They do that.
Yeah.
And so I just love the way that all that came through. I write a lot about those things as well. One of my big interests is writing about where nature and like the city interact, which is quite fascinating if you live in a heavily developed area like where I am. And so do you go out now? By this point, I know you've probably been writing for a while. Like I can't wait for your Canyon poems to come out. I will definitely be on the lookout for that when it's published. Because you're
Wonderful.
speaking to my mind and my heart with that kind of poetry. Do you have experiences a lot where something will happen? You might be sitting on your porch and then suddenly, oh, I can get a poem out of that.
Oh, absolutely. All the time. I have so many poems. I just have reams and reams. I've written thousands of poems.
Mhm.
I've been writing poems for about 30 years.
Okay.
And I have so many nature poems.
Mhm.
I have to remind myself to write some human poems once in a
Right.
while.
Yeah.
But yes, that raven experience was absolutely true. And I had so many similar experiences in the canyon with other animals. We're talking rattlesnakes and scorpions and bats and all kinds of animals, the coyote, the Mexican gray wolf. I've had mountain lions experiences. I have a ton of poems about nature, but that raven poem was a real
Yeah.
kick because that raven was so cool. They are
Mhm.
so incredibly intelligent. And he
Mhm.
came up and he just sidled and he just turned his beak sideways. And I poured the water out and he just guzzled it.
Mhm.
It saved him a trip down to the river.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to feed him, so I didn't give him any food, but I
Right.
did share my water with him.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
magical.
I want to make friends with some of the crows that come around. We have American and fish crows like in equal numbers here. They come around early in the morning, especially the fish crows, and they're honking away. And I want to find a bench and sit down with some peanuts or something and just wait for them to approach.
Oh,
But
trust me, they will.
yeah, I have a dog, so I have to try to do it so that they don't see me with the dog.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but yeah, those were great. I can't wait for the book. So good luck
Oh,
with
thank
that.
you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Nancy, I'm really interested in your writing practice, and particularly, I imagine, this is just my outsider view of being a ranger, that you probably had a lot of downtime without a whole lot of people around. And I'm wondering if you are finding in the years you've been in Baker City, if you have enough, do you have enough solo time to get writing done, or is it a different experience to be in a town versus being in a canyon?
Every place that I've ever lived, I've always found time to write. And my favorite writing time is early in the morning. I get up at like 4:30, and I do my writing for the first couple of hours of the day. That's usually when I do my reading too. I do my intense, study of other poets and my own personal writing and revision and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I dedicate many hours every morning to my work. I find that if I am not able to do it, I feel kind of miserable. I really like to have my morning time for my writing, for poetry. It's really important to me. And I find that's the freest time of the day for me. So it works. I sit with my coffee and a cat in my lap and my books spread all over the place and my pen. And I write my drafts with a pen on just a really cheap little notebook, the cheapest one I can find. If I can find a notebook for $1, that's what I buy. And I've just, filled up ridiculous. And then of course I do all my major work on the computer, but yeah, it's really fun. And, actually in the canyon, I did not write while I was in the canyon, except in the ranger logs. I've written some really cool ranger logs and I wish I had them. I had a friend that did a Trans Canyon hike, 6 or 7 years ago. And he stopped at the ranger station where I worked. And there happened to be a ranger there that day. And she knew me. And he had introduced himself and said, my friend was a ranger here and she wrote in the logs, could I see the logs? And so she showed him the logs, and actually he was able to take photographs with his little phone, his little iPhone. So I have some of the pages of the logs that I wrote down there, which is way cool. That's pretty cool. And some of them were poetic, but mostly, to be honest, when I was working down there, it was busy all the time. there was always somebody that had a problem, some poor little kid puking, or somebody was, and that's not anything to joke about. That's a very serious situation. It frightens people terribly. And people with, heat stroke, heat exhaustion, hyponatremia, so many problems. They get bitten by bugs. They fall and cut their knees get sore. So it's so busy. You're constantly, you just barely finish with one person and you have to start with another. So it's just a continuous, somebody gets lost, somebody needs another night, somebody can't find their friend, and it goes on. So there's little time for free writing, but the experience just fills my head. And now, I mean, I've been away from the canyon from that work for, about 15 years. And still my head is just so full of material. I could write probably another 50 poems easily about that time there. I'm trying to be really judicious about it, though. I want to try to gather the material that is the most powerfully meaningful, that has the greatest substance. But every once in a while, I'll write one that's just goofy. I wrote one about reaching down into the culvert to turn on the water so that the campers would have water for the season. And the scorpions were just loaded in there. They were just all full. The whole culvert was full of scorpions. I had to reach down the center of the culvert to reach the water handles so that I could open the pipe and get the water flowing. And then another time I had to pull the light fixture down off the ceiling so I could clean it. It was full of scorpions. There were like 30 scorpions in there. And I looked and I went, cool. They all look like they're sleeping. I'll just go over here and dump them out. I went over there and dumped them out, and they just scattered. And I had to run, because when scorpions get upset, you know what the Tasmanian devil was on the cartoon show. I forget the name of that cartoon show. They do that. They just spin. They just go insane. They go insane when they're upset, and they have their tail cocked and they're ready to just nail you. So I had like 30 little scorpions just going. I had to run. So there's some funny things that happen down there.
I was going to ask, do you do a lot of revision, or does it sort of tend to come to you in bursts?
Oh my
or-
goodness, I revise like crazy. I start with my draft, and I take my notebook and my pen, and I usually write my first draft in prose. I just lay it out there. I just let it rip. I don't stop. I don't critique myself as I'm writing. I just let it rip. And sometimes it comes fast, and sometimes it comes really slow. Sometimes I have to just relax a little bit and let the music come, or the words or the images. You guys know, you're poets. The images come, the words come. Maybe a fascinating piece of language will come, or a fascinating movement, sometimes an expression, a facial expression from another person. I mean, just almost anything will spur a poem, and I'll just sit down and let it happen. And I always write it out in prose first. And my handwriting is just atrocious. I pity anyone who tries to read it, but I can read it. And so after I do that, then I go to my computer and I do my first revision, and then I set it aside for a week, a month, a year, 2 years, 5 years. And then I, at some point, go back to it and work it over however many times it takes to make it into a real poem. And I find it incredibly rewarding. Cutting is a valuable tool. And using a thesaurus is a valuable tool, though I don't all the time. Fortunately, I have a pretty decent vocabulary, so I usually luck out. But sometimes I have to drag out a dictionary or a thesaurus or something. What I love most, and I know you guys know this one, what I love most is when I'm just sitting there quietly and waiting for it to happen, and it happens. And the lines start coming, and the words start coming, and it just happens. And I'll write it down, and okay, what comes next? And it comes. Oh my God, that is the most remarkable experience. That is like this magical thing that happens. And you guys all know, and probably all artists probably know that experience. When that magical thing happens, it's like, whoa. I mean, I just get goosebumps every time I think about it. It's such a magical thing. And I'm eternally grateful for that experience. I think if I could not write, I would not, I don't think I would care to be alive anymore. I mean, it is just the most precious and most valuable thing now, especially late in my life when I no longer have the physical capacity to do all the intense work that I used to do in the wilderness. So yeah, it's pretty special. I highly recommend it to anyone. Writing is great. Poetry is a gift.
Yes. I was going to follow up also kind of along the same lines. Do you show like more or less complete drafts to anyone else? Do you have a group or any like one really good first reader? I found that extremely helpful myself.
You know, what's really funny is I probably wrote for 28 years without a reader. Well, when I was first going to school and taking creative writing at the University of Montana, of course, I had my workshop group, you know, but after I was out on my own, I had no reader. I had no one to show my work to. I've always been kind of a loner, and that pretty much still follows today. But I have met a few people who are trusted readers, and I do send them my work after it's been revised multiple times. And even when I think it's finished and discover that it's not. And so, yeah, I have a couple trusted readers now who take a look at my work for me sometimes. Sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's not. You know, I have such a relationship with my connection to whatever that force is that speaks through us, through our pens, that I tend to trust it quite well. But that's also the reason why it takes so long for my poems to actually get out there, because I never trust a poem after just one day or after just 1 week or after a month, and oftentimes not even after a year. I tend to make them wait, and I make them go through many revisions before I'll let them out. And sometimes even after 10 years, I'll come across a poem and I'll go back to it and I'll go, oh, I get it. And I fix it. And then oh, cool. It took me 10 years to write this poem and I finally got it, you know, and that's okay, however long it takes. I'm not in any hurry to get my work out there. I know the competition is so huge. Everybody wants to get their work published. You know, we're sending them to competitions and contests and journals and magazines. Oh, I want this published so bad. But what I find sometimes is being in a hurry is not always a good idea. 10 years can be a good thing. So 5 years can be a good thing.
Well, let's give Nancy another round of applause, maybe this time that you can hear.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks. Thank you so much, everyone. It's very
Thank you
kind.
very much. Yes.